this series, God's series, and Martin's been talking about it on Sunday morning as well. But the way we came up with our questions for Sunday night, what we're exploring is we had sheets in your small group folders, and we had a question box out in the cafe, and looked at those and created 3 different lessons. The first week we talked about why Jesus? Why choose Jesus Christ? Why should we follow Christ? What does that mean? And last week we looked at a lot of your questions that you had about who is God. And tonight we're exploring, anybody have any ideas? The Bible, yeah. It came in tonight, there were Bibles in every seats, and we felt like that was a good connection, pretty important if we were going to be looking at what is the Bible and exploring that. So there were lots of questions that you guys asked, and that's what we'll be looking at tonight in a similar style of what we did last night. And Travis is going to try and answer these. He came prepared with some books to talk about the Bible, which actually relates to our first question. A lot of people wondered, Travis, this, it looks like a Bible. I mean, it is a Bible. It is a Bible. It looks like a book is what I meant to say. Thank you. Buzzing sound stopped. It looks like a book. So what, is this a book, or what kind of book is this?
Good question.
So, yeah. So the Bible is a collection of books, and how many books are in it? 66. Yeah, there's 66 books. How many in the Old Testament?
Like 30.
You should have stopped. 32.
31.
27. 40. 0. Good job, John.
They weren't called books yet. Trick question. Try it again.
Yeah, there's 39 in the Old Testament, which means how many in the New Testament? 81. 39 plus 81 is 66.
Good math.
Good math. Yeah. So I may talk about this in a minute, but I've got these. I want to pass these around in case you haven't ever seen them. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. Yeah. So this is a Hebrew Bible. We've talked about this some before. Some people have, but what's cool about this is you actually start from what looks like the back, and you read it backwards. So just so you know, these are mine, so please be careful with them. But this is what Hebrew. You can't. That's what a Hebrew Bible looks like. And then the New Testament was written in Greek. Yeah. So here's a Greek New Testament. If you want to just pass that around, you can check it out. It's kind of fun. So yeah, it's made up of 2 different parts, Old Testament, New Testament. The Old Testament came out of the Jewish religion, out of the nation of Israel. New Testament came out of Christianity, which everybody knows. So yeah, that's kind of that's the gist of what the Bible is. But oh yeah, the words holy, Bible. Holy means what? Holy actually means set apart. Like holy means different, basically. So to say that this is a holy Bible, and the word Bible means collection of books. So this is like a set apart, a different kind of collection of books, unlike any other. That's kind of what the name Holy Bible means.
Okay, so 39 books in the Old Testament, 27 books in the New Testament. It's not just one book. We've got lots of books in the Bible. So what kinds of books are in the Bible? What are these 66? What are they? What kind of books are they?
I think lots of people kind of assume that the Bible is all the same kind of book, like it's all this holy book kind of thing. But in the Bible, you've got history, you've got poetry, you have you got songs, you've got wisdom writings like little proverbs, all kinds. You've got philosophical books, you've got theological statements, and they're all very different. So the Old Testament is in Hebrew referred to as the Tanakh. You should try it. It's just fun to say if you got some phlegm. Tanakh. Yeah, and that is a word made up of the 3 words that make up the New Testament, or the Old Testament, excuse me. So you've got Torah. Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Thank you. Yeah, that's the first 5 books. By the way, by the time in Jesus' day, in where Jesus lived, if you were around 12, by that time you would have had those 5 books memorized. So how many of you are close to that by now? Good. Okay, awesome. Yeah, this word Nevi'im is the Hebrew word for prophets, and that's books like 1 First and 2nd Kings and Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, all the kind of prophet books. And then this word ketuvim is the Hebrew word that basically means writings, and that's talking about like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, things like that. So that's what that is made up of. And then the New Testament, you have at least 4 different kinds. You've got Gospels. Lots of people think that Gospels are like biographies, but they're really not the same thing as biographies when we think of biographies today. And I don't know if I have time to talk about that or not. But then you have Acts, which there's just how many Acts are there in the New Testament? 1. There's 1 Acts. Yeah.
Trick question.
And you have letters, and you have Apocalypse. There is 1 book that's an apocalypse. What is it?
Revelation.
Revelation. If we had lots of time to talk about that, we would, because I actually really love that book. And then letters are actual letters written to real people. So like Romans is a letter written to people in Rome. Yeah. Corinthians and Corinth, Ephesians and Ephesus. But there's lots of letters written. Most of them are written by a guy named Paul, written to specific churches in specific places.
So we've got these 66 different books. These are the kinds of books that those 66 make up. But why is it important to know that there are all these different kinds of books? Why is it even important?
Okay, you guys know this from school, that when you're looking at specific books, you look to different kinds of books for different kinds of information. So I have some pictures of a couple different kinds of books, I think. Okay, so this would be from what kind of book? Yeah, like biology book, a science book. So what kind of information are you going to look for there? Yeah, you're going to look for science and plant cell structure and things like that. Next. Math. Who loves math? Woo! Yeah, all right. So yeah, a math book is totally different. You're getting totally different kinds of information from a science book. Next. Anybody read that and tell me what it's from? That is English?
Hunger Games.
It is from the Hunger Games.
Winston Westbrook.
So, now when you go to read something from the Hunger Games, you approach it differently than if you're looking at a math book, right? So when you read the Hunger Games as a book, as it is, in kind of like literature form, you might read it and go, this is a really good book, and you want to pass it on to your friends and you want them to read it. Now what if you read some of the stuff from the Hunger Games, like what if it was front page news on the Tennessean? How would you react to that? Why not? Yeah, you'd freak out because people are like eating people, right? Don't they do that? And I haven't read the book. Did I just ruin it for everybody? Hunger Games, they're hungry, they eat people. I think that's it. I haven't read it, but I think that's the gist of the plot, right?
Let's go with that.
Okay, so if you, spoiler alert, people eat people. All right, but if you go, so again, if you go to the Hunger Games thinking this is literature, it's in a book, it's fiction, you have one reaction. If you read that in the Tennessean as news, you have a totally different reaction. Okay, it's the same thing when it comes to the Bible. It's really important to know what kind of literature you're looking at when you read the Bible, because it will help you figure out what kind of things you're looking for. Right? So when you look at a math book, you're looking for different kinds of things than if you look at the Hunger Games. So an example that I think we hear a lot about in debates within Christianity is the book of Genesis. Okay, there's lots of debates about Genesis, about creation, and there's lots of arguments that you can't be a Christian and think evolution might be a possibility, right? Well, that is true if you look at Genesis as a science book or as a history book, right? If you look at Genesis and what you're expecting to find there is, this gives me exact scientific details of how this went down, then you might say, so no, you can't believe in that and be okay with evolution. But Genesis, when you study the type of literature that it is, it's actually not a science book. It wasn't intended to be a science book. It wasn't intended to be a history book. In fact, somebody look up, Genesis is the first book in the Bible. Read me the first 4 words. Those are maybe the 4 most important words of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God. So what the creation stories in Genesis are trying to get across aren't necessarily this is how it all happened scientifically, but in the beginning, God was in the center of all of it. God created, God had a relationship with people, yada, yada, yada. But does that make sense? So scientifically, it can't jive with evolution. But if you look at it as what it is, and it's a theological statement, like God is at the center of the universe. Well, God can be at the center of the universe and could have used a process like evolution to create the universe, right? So it makes a difference on what kind of literature it is and how you approach it. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that kind of thing? Or you're like, this is review for me? Okay.
Okay.
We sound good.
Okay, so if you're looking at Genesis, in Genesis 1, there's actually one story of the creation story. And then you look in Genesis 2, it's actually a different account of the creation story. Same with, there's 4 different Gospels that we looked at, and they all have different accounts, but of kind of the same story. So lots of people, a lot of y'all had questions about, are there contradictions in the Bible? And if there are, what do we do with that? Does that mean it's reliable or not?
Yeah, so if you look at Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, who's ever read those before? Who's ever noticed that they're different? They're kind of different, yeah. So Genesis 1 talks about creation in a particular order. Genesis 2 talks about creation, but the order that it says things were created in is different from the order in Genesis 1. So right there, Genesis 1 and 2, there are contradictions in the Bible. Now, if we're looking at Genesis, again, this goes back to understanding what type of book it is. If we're looking at Genesis as history or science, then it's like, okay, freak out, there's contradictions in the Bible, oh no. But if you look at it as it's trying to communicate something different than that. What you see in Genesis 1 is it's trying to say, in the beginning, God was there, God was in the middle. And Genesis 2 is all about the relationship between human beings and God. That's kind of what it's trying to get across. So if you look at it like that and understand it like that, the contradictions that you see don't really matter. Same thing in the Gospels. Lindsay mentioned there's 4 Gospels. All of them tell the story of Jesus' crucifixion. In every one of the Gospels, there's a sign above Jesus' head on the cross. In every one of the Gospels, the words on the sign are different. Like, it doesn't say the same words. Well, what's that mean? Those are contradictions. Does that mean it didn't happen? Well, no, I don't think that means it didn't happen. It's kind of like this. Have you ever, have your parents ever told a story that you were also there for, and the way they told it was different than you remembered it?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. How many of you have ever corrected, how many of you like to correct your parents when they do things like that? Yeah. Yeah, so my mom tells stories like that, and I'm like, no, that's not how it happened. I remember it differently. Now, just because we remember it differently, does that mean that it didn't happen? No, it just means that we had different perspectives on how it happened. And I think, Deb, you can maybe correct me on this. I think in law enforcement, if all of the eyewitnesses tell the same exact story, that's actually a bad thing.
And they all got together and made up.
Yeah. So if everybody, so if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all said the exact same story, then that's actually a pretty good indication that somebody's lying, right? Because everybody sees things from different angles. They have different perspectives on things. They emphasize different things when they see them. So a lot of times when there's contradictions, or what we would say are contradictions in the Bible, that's more what's going on. Any questions about that? Okay.
Okay, so that kind of leads us into another question that somebody asked, which is who wrote the Bible? So if we've got like these 4 different gospel stories and they're from different people, then what, is supposed to be a trustworthy book, who actually wrote the Bible?
Yeah, so here's something really important and easy to remember when it comes to who wrote the Bible. It's real, real, real. Real, real, real. Real people, real times, real places. So the Bible didn't just drop out of the sky at one point. I know, I'm sorry, listen, so my first semester of college, I had a class where the professor was saying things like this, and there were literally people crying in the classroom because lots of people don't hear things like this until they go to college, and then it's like, what? Well, yeah, okay, so real, real, real. Real people, real times, real places. That's how the Bible was written. Thank you. For instance, in the New Testament, there are letters. Most of the letters in the New Testament were written by a real person named Paul. He lived during that time. He wrote his letters from around 40 to 60 AD or CE, depending on CE. So yeah, when you read academic stuff, they're starting to use CE and BCE. CE is Common Era. BCE is before the Common Era. That's what that means. There you go. That's free. So, real people. AD. 40 to 60 AD.
Little off here. Letters.
Sorry about that. Letters. Thank you. Paul. Real. When he wrote Romans, he wrote that to who? People in Rome, like we talked about. They were in a real place. He wrote it at a real time, somewhere between 40 and 60. So there were real things happening to those real people, and he was addressing real issues that were going on there. So the letter to the Romans, it's not like we can just read it and pretend like it's the letter to the Brentwoodians. Okay? Because it was written at a different place at a different time. Now there are lots of things in Romans that we can understand and that we can learn. But one of the things we have to do is kind of understand where was it written, who was it written to, why was it written in that particular time, before we can understand what it means for us.
Okay, so this is another person's question, which actually kind of relates to what you're just talking about. So it was written a long time ago, but then today we have all these different versions. Like mine says NIV, New International Version. Why are there so many different versions out there of the same original text?
Most of you, you've all taken a foreign language? Okay, so you know like Spanish. Can somebody give me an example of a word from Spanish that doesn't translate exactly into English? Me gusta? What's the literal meaning of that? It pleases me. I like. Yeah. So it doesn't, there's just some weird translation stuff, and at some point somebody translating from Spanish to English had to try to figure out the best way to say that. Well, what happens is you've got the Bible written originally in Hebrew and Greek, and so you've got people who are doing their best to try to figure out what some of these words and some of these phrases mean in English, but they don't all translate directly. And so there are people who sort of like, yeah, I don't really agree with how you translated this in English, so I'm going to say it like this. And that's kind of how we ended up with so many different translations and versions of the Bible.
Okay, so we talked about there being 66 books in the Bible, and I remember there's being a couple different people had this question. I've heard that there are other books out there that didn't make the cut into our holy text, and so what happened, what's up with those books? Why didn't they make it in? How are those chosen?
Okay, so the process, the Bible in the form that we have, actually in the form that we have it, didn't really happen until the printing press was invented in the 1400s. So before that, it was really unheard of for people to have Bibles at their houses. Like maybe a whole village might have something like that, but it was handwritten and all that stuff. And lots of times, back in Jesus' time, they would have every book would be its own scroll. So it wasn't until the 1400s and really until the Reformation, a little bit later than that, 1500s, where it became important for people to have a Bible in their homes. But going back, the Bible in the form that we have it now, the process of putting those specific books together is called canonization.
While you're writing that, I'll also say that it was a lot of oral tradition, and so people would be retelling it orally, and that the idea of story was so important back in that day.
Yeah, so before the Bible was ever written down, it started as people telling stories, and then eventually somebody would write those stories down, and that's how it got in written form. So canonization, this didn't really happen until the maybe 3rd or 4th century, 200s, 300s. Nobody's actually really sure exactly when it happened. But there were kind of 4 things. Here's the other book, because somebody asked a question about there are other books that aren't in the Bible. This is a book that I have. It's called The Other Bible, and it is full of books that are about God and Jesus, but aren't in the Bible. So if you want to, it's like hundreds of books. If you want to pass that around, you can, just to check that out. But there were kind of 4 criteria for a book to be included in the Bible as we know it now. The first one, they called it apostolic authority. And what that means, not authority, I'm sorry. Apostolic authority, basically what that means is for something to be included in the canon, which is what they call it, the canon, as we know it now, it had to come from one of the apostles, one of the 12, or Paul, who wasn't one of the original 12, or it had to come out of a community or a church that they had started. Apostolic authority. The second one, universal acceptance. So it had to be a book that was used widely in all kinds of different churches all over the place. Yeah. The third was liturgical usage. My handwriting's awful. And the fourth was consistent message. So for something to be included, and this is referring to the New Testament. The Old Testament kind of had a different process, but it wasn't really canonized until around the same time as the New Testament. So liturgical usage, it had to be something the churches were currently using, and these are churches spread out all over the place. And consistent message, their theology had to be about the same. So those books, where is that book? Okay, hundreds of books. They had to meet all four of these criteria to be included in the New Testament. So hundreds of books that didn't meet all of these, and these were really important things. And it was a long process that people took very seriously to get to that point.
Which then makes this, in my opinion, kind of all the more important because it had to meet all of those things. But ultimately, I mean, why does all this stuff matter? Who cares to know all this information about the Bible?
That's a good question. Looking at the clock.
In like a minute or less.
Yeah, 60 seconds. Why is the Bible important in 60 seconds or less? Great, thank you. And go. Yeah, I'm not going to do it. We're going to get out a couple minutes late. I apologize. Because I want to say a couple of these things and not just one of them. The first one, this is a personal thing. I love the Bible. I love reading the Bible. And when I read the Bible, very often I will feel something kind of come alive in me just from something I've read. And I can read the same thing 20 different times and have 20 different things stick out to me about it. It's the only book I've ever read that is like that. It's like it's alive, right? So, and that's what's kind of cool about the Bible. So how many of you have ever been told not to do something because it would be bad for you and you did it anyway? Almost every hand goes up. Yeah, right. Adam and Eve in Genesis, they were told not to do something because it would be bad for them. They did it anyway. Like the story of Adam and Eve, it didn't just happen in the past. It's still happening now. Or that's something that's so cool about the Bible is the stories, they're not just about ancient dead people, but so many of the stories are things that are still happening now. It's like a living book. So that's one thing that's really cool. The second thing, I've got about a few years ago, I made a playlist. Amanda and I, my wife, she's lovely. She's here. There she is. Okay. Thank you. We made a playlist, and it looks like this. You can tell a lot about a person by their playlist, right? By their iPod. So guess what was going on in our lives when we made this playlist? I was having a baby, right? It was weird. Okay, no. We were. This is part of our actual hospital playlist, and so several times the doctor walked in and was like, "Are you really playing this song?" We were like, "Yes, we are. We are those people." Okay, so this playlist is incomplete, right? So this is my playlist. I put it together. If you want to complete this playlist for me, what do you have to do? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You have to add 3 more songs, but you want to make this playlist for me. It's not just songs that you would put on the playlist, but what do you have to think about to complete this playlist?
With the word baby.
The songs that are already there. You got to think about the songs that are already there. What was the
songs that you like?
Songs that I like. Songs that Amanda likes. That's more important. Okay. Yeah. What else do you need to think about?
Has to be the babies.
It goes along with the theme. You gotta figure out the artists, because there are certain artists on here. This is a really weird mix of artists, like from Aerosmith and Steppenwolf to the Beebs. Okay?
Look at the lyrics of those songs.
Yeah, you want to study the lyrics of the songs, because those are important. Because not all the titles are about babies, right? So,
well, they are.
well, okay. All that to say, you'd have to study the existing playlist in order to be able to fill in the rest of the songs in the playlist. In many, many, many ways, the Bible is kind of like that, right? We've got the beginning of the playlist and we've got the end of the playlist here, and we've got to fill in the middle. Well, the Bible, we've got the beginning, like We can learn about who God is, what God likes, what God's preferences are. We can learn about who Jesus is, who Jesus was, how Jesus lived. We've got some idea in the end, like there's some beautiful pictures in Isaiah and in Revelation kind of about what God's vision for the world and for how things should be at some point in the future. So we can get an understanding for that. But we're kind of living here in this in-between time. Right? So the more we can understand about who God is, who Jesus is, the more we can understand about what God wants the world to be like, then the more we can understand the kinds of things that we should do and the kinds of things that we should be about now. So that's why studying the Bible for us as Christians is so important. Because if we don't study the Bible, then we don't really know what we're supposed to do in the time that we're in right now. It's our best hope for figuring out what our lives should be about. There's this quote, a guy named Marcus Borg, he's a New Testament professor. And I came across this quote this week, and I think I've got it. Yeah. He said, "To be Christian means to be in primary continuing conversation with the Bible as foundational for our identity and vision. If this conversation ceases, then if this conversation ceases, then all right, you guys have a good night." The rest of the quote says, "If this conversation ceases, then we cease to be Christian, for the Bible is at the heart of Christianity." I want to read it again, just listen. To be Christian means to be in primary continuing conversation with the Bible. Like reading the Bible, studying the Bible, learning about the Bible. Because it is foundational for our identity and vision as Christians. If this conversation ceases, like if we stop studying the Bible, if we stop reading the Bible, if we stop trying to learn about the Bible, if we just leave the Bible on a bookshelf in our room and we don't have anything to do with it, then we cease to be Christian. For the Bible is at the heart of Christianity. In other words, it's impossible to be Christian unless you're in a relationship with the Bible. Because the Bible is our best source for figuring out what being a Christian looks like and means. And so, all of this stuff, like I said, a lot of this stuff is like college level intro to religion stuff. And it's really, it's very academic. Think about the canonization process. That's really academic. But at the heart of it, the point and the challenge is, you've got to be, as somebody who calls yourself a Christian, I think it's essential. You have to be reading and studying and learning about the Bible, or else it's impossible for you to know what being a Christian is about. So you guys are going to go to your groups. You're going to kind of talk about what you think about this quote and about some other things, and look at some other stuff and sort of do some self-assessment of like, how Christian am I, if this is what it means to be a Christian. And then also in your small group folders are these bookmarks for Project 345. This is the easiest reading plan I've ever done in my life, because it's one chapter of the New Testament 5 days a week, and it literally will only take you 3 or 4 minutes to get it done. So you have time to do that. And I would really challenge you and encourage you to do that. And it'd be real cool if your small group kind of like did it together and talked about that some. So anything else?
And also, if you don't have a Bible, you're welcome to take the one that was on your seat as you came in. So we know not everybody has one at home. So please feel free to do that. All right, you're dismissed to snack supper in the cafe and then on to small group.